guys, it's April from April Sarah, and I am here today with Shay from over at Shay Geeks Out and Steve from the Lawn Gnome. We are going to be talking about Brandon Sanderson's new comic, Dark One, Book One, because we cannot contain the words that we want to say. Because I know I got one of the original releases of this, and I know there was some free comic book releases of this as well. But we have been waiting. We have been anticipating this because this needs to be talked about. Dark One is the story of Paul, who is a New Yorker who is having visions of being a tyrant in a different world. And things might not be quite as they seem. And so I am going to start out by sending it over to Shay so we can get her initial response to this, because I know she is a fellow Brandon Sanderson reader and I would love to hear her thoughts. And then we'll go to you, Steve, because you were kind of newer in the realm of Sanderson, and I'm really excited to hear what you think as well.
Thank you.
So if you're unfamiliar with Brandon Sanderson, you're not familiar with his very unique style of storytelling, which very much focuses on very structured magic systems. And so they tend to be a little complicated as you read his books, but they're written simply enough that anybody can understand them. And they're usually not so detailed that it's too much. He doesn't overwhelm you with it, but he gives you a lot at a time sometimes. With this one, he does a really good job of giving it to you slowly, and that's not something he typically does. So I liked that change for a comic format. I think it lended better because we're learning as Paul is learning, and that lends very well to this particular story because of Paul's adventures. And being someone who loves Brandon Sanderson works, he's been talking about Dark One for years. This has been one of his pet projects, like in the background, for as long as I've been reading him, which has been since 2015. So like 6-7 years. And it was a pet project long before that too. So this is something he's wanted to tell for a really long time, just like his other comic series, White Sand. So it's really interesting to have him take this. And one thing I want to point out, he used a different publisher than he did with White Sand. And I actually am very happy at the change in publisher because I felt like we're getting a more solid publish. We're getting more pages at a time for the same amount of money. And we are getting stronger artists. And I do think that lends very well to this particular story as opposed to his other comics. So overall, I adored this. My husband read it. He didn't get along with it quite as well, but I really just had a great time with it and enjoyed it. So with that said, Steve, take it away.
Well, yes, I am very much a newbie to the world of Brandon Sanderson. However, I think the two ladies in the room can agree that I have really dived headfirst into the pool of Brandon Sanderson, though I would be really weirded out if I was actually the only one in this room that actually met Brandon Sanderson, because I actually met him at 2019's BookCon, and I had him sign my copies of Mistborn, which were amazing, just to meet the guy. The guy's a Calvin and Hobbes fan, so how could I not get along with the guy? He was wearing a Calvin and Hobbes t-shirt, but no, it's just, when I found out about Mistborn, loved Mistborn, Skyward, unbelievable work. So this time around in 2020, I was dealing, of course, with the pandemic like we all were, but Free Comic Book Day had turned into Free Comic Book Summer. And I am getting my usual free comic books, then I leave, I go into my car, I check all my stuff on the website, and then I take a look that one of the free comic books of that week was a preview for Brandon Sanderson's The Dark One, and I was like, oh my God, Brandon Sanderson's writing a comic book? I literally went back to the store the next day to grab the book because I knew I had to get it. The craziest thing was the fact that my local comic book store manager had no idea who Brandon Sanderson was. And I had to explain, this guy is an author that writes books like comics. That's what makes this guy so great. So yeah, when I found out the Dark One was coming out, I was over the moon. And Shay, you said something that I'm so glad that you did. The fact that it was published by Vault Comics, they're one of the hottest indie comic companies right now. Along with Dark One, I am reading two very interesting series. One is called Giga, which is like humans worshiping mechas from an ancient time, which is so interesting. And I'm also reading The Blue Flame, which is a new take on the superhero formula. But Dark One is amazing. Words cannot describe how much I love this story, and quite frankly, as someone who has read some of his books and planning to read some more, the Reckoners trilogy, obviously, which they are basically the women in the room making sure that I read it soon, but I think this may be one of his greatest things that I have ever read. The atmosphere, the characters, the story. Let's just say that one book is not enough for this. We need more. And we need it now.
Piggybacking off of that, two things. I have met Brandon Sanderson several times at local signings on opening day because I live near where he lives. I grew up in the town he currently lives in. He lives nearby. I can get signed copies anytime if you want them. But anyway.
No, thank you. No.
Secondly, you had said he writes like comics. I want to twist that a little bit. He writes his books more like an anime. Because I think his Mistborn series would lend very well to an animated format.
I agree.
It's not just, written as a comic. It needs the movement and the flow. And I think that would have helped his other comic series, White Sand, very, very much. To be in a visual format where it actually moves. Because the movement of the sand and stuff is really hard to do on page. And they had like two different artists trying to do it, and they did them differently. And I didn't really love either. So I think in an animated sense where you could actually have the movement, it would have worked a lot better.
I agree.
Yeah, no, off of what you just said, Shay, and bringing up White Sand, and the choice to go with Vault for this one was... I am so glad they did, because I struggled so much
They're
with
a great
White Sand.
company.
I love the storyline of White Sand, but I wish that these people at Vault, had taken that storyline, because they would have done it justice in a way that...
Yeah, it was Dynamite that did White Sand.
Yeah,
Dynamite's hit or miss. I've read a few of their books too. They're hit or miss.
And like April and I have both said, the story is great, but the way the art was done was not our favorite in either rendition. Because about a little more than halfway through the series, it switches artists and looks very different.
This one, Dark One, gives me the feel of Stormlight Archive because of some of the story choices that are being made in it. And I know I got a lot of comments on my original Dark One review being a little bit paranoid about whether or not this one was going to be good. And I promise that this one, you need to stop and read this one if you like Brandon Sanderson at all. Because Brandon Sanderson likes to play with good versus evil, dark versus light, and what that could possibly mean, and what we may be missing by trying to set up that divide. And he does that in a lot of his stories, which is what I really, really like, because he ends up playing with characters in a way that it sucks you in. Even the characters that you're like, okay, this person is not going to be any good for me, but I like them. And I don't know what that says about me.
No, it's so funny that you said that, because when I was reading the book, and of course it's about the main character is Paul, and I'm reading, and I'm like saying to myself, oh God, I know he's going to become the bad guy, but this guy just seems like a decent fella. Like, why does he have to go down this path? And what makes it even more amazing, but then again, that's just Brandon Sanderson. You think that because you've seen what he's like at the beginning, you think that when he discovers his destiny, he's going to say, no, I'm not this type of guy. But oh my God, he just runs with it. I'm like, wow, we're actually going there. That's pretty cool.
Another thing that is very Brandon Sanderson about this particular story is the fact that his charming humor that he loves to do in his YA series, like Skyward and the Reckoners, definitely shines through in Dark One through Paul. The way Paul interacts with the world that he's in is very Sanderson. And if you're a Sanderson fan, you will understand that and see that. But if you're not a Sanderson fan, it's still a really enjoyable reading experience. Because, all of us as Sanderson fans have talked about comparisons to others of his series. I put those in because I think you might be interested in his storytelling and things after reading this. But honestly, this is definitely top tier comics, top tier art, top tier story. This is one of my favorite comics I've read all year, and I've been reading a lot more comics than I usually do. So,
Yeah, no, I know you mentioned how Paul becomes, he's going to become the bad guy. But we have that Brandon Sanderson moment where is he really the bad guy?
Yes.
Or is there something deeper going on here with the narrative and with the draws and with the light and how that whole system, we have this like seemingly balanced system that is kind to one group but very destructive to another. And depending on which side you're viewing it from, it seems like a utopia. But for the people it is a utopia, was it supposed to be a utopia? Because you have this point, because I've gone back and I've read it several times now, where you start out thinking that this dark is what is encroaching onto the light, but you start to pick up little hints and little clues, especially since we have this Destined One archetype and we have this Dark One archetype who isn't even coming from the world that they're throwing out of balance and putting back into balance. And there are so many different messages that can be thrown in this story. So the fact that we've only got book one and there's so many little pieces that you're like, but what happens next? Because you've got me invested in this story. And we don't know for sure if we're going to get book two. I am crossing my fingers and really hoping so, because we have this whole moment where we're setting up all of this narrative and what this narrative means. And then it's just like all ripped apart. And what does that leave us with?
Yeah, as you were saying, this is a very Sanderson thing, but Brandon Sanderson as an author is really good at writing an antagonist that you can see their perspective and understand how they got from point A to point B. So I kind of like Ghibli, I never feel like there's a true evil bad guy because you understand everybody's motivations. And so you can see how they made the decisions that they did that led them to where they were. Sanderson is very good at that, and I felt that through all of his series that I have read, which is everything. So it's just a Sanderson trait, and Dark One definitely takes that on, especially because you have that last chapter that I'm not going to spoil because you all need to go buy it and read it, that turns the whole story on its head, which is why we want all of you to go and buy it and read it and enjoy it so we can all get more story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how this book is even doing in sales. I mean, the fact that this is not even sold, at least not at my comic shop. I mean, this is something that you would probably find at a Barnes & Noble, or obviously you could find it on Amazon.com, which is where I got it. But yeah, I mean, it would be sad if this story didn't get finished, because I would say that as people out there who love Brandon Sanderson, especially when they finish a book that they know there's going to be more of, it's just like they're waiting on bated breath for the next book. But if the next book never comes, that's like torture, like sheer unadulterated torture.
Uh-huh. I know the Barnes & Noble special edition sold out, which is a good thing. But I also don't know how many copies there were of that. So it'd be interesting if at some point he makes some kind of, maybe in his State of Sanderson, if he kind of brought us up to date on where this project is. I'm really, really hoping he at some point, I know he's got his YouTube channel now that he's doing weekly updates on. but I don't think he's mentioned Dark One in it yet.
Worst case scenario, we over here at That's Comical, we could reach out to Vault Comics and ask what's going on. We are following them on Twitter, actually.
Perfect.
Now, I did quickly pull this up, just on the Copper Bind, which is kind of where Brandon Sanderson puts a lot of the info about all of his series. And I guess there's going to be an audio original of this particular one via a podcast. As well, it is optioned for a TV series.
Interesting.
Oh, there you go.
It's optioned. Most of his stuff is optioned because it's also good. So whether we get that or not, that is to be seen. But it is currently optioned, so do know that.
That's good to know.
There is hope there will be more.
Well, I'll feel a little bit more of a sigh of relief when one of his stories that is actually optioned for film or television finally comes to the big or small screen. You know, considering the fact that, like, this is not one of his, but it's like the fact that we've all been waiting for Lunar Chronicles movies. Who knows how long it's going to take for a Brandon Sanderson movie to show up, you know?
Well, they've been waiting for Wheel of Time TV show or movies for years, though they're finally getting them, I believe, next year.
Let's hope.
But it's been filming in production. There's teaser trailers, all that kind of stuff is happening.
So I got to ask you guys, who was your favorite character in the book?
For me, for me it was probably Nika, the sister, because you can tell she is a character that's got that little bit of sass, and she knows a lot, and she's trying to guide Paul in a way. Just because there's like almost this sibling thing going on, and that always gets me every time.
Right.
I think for me, it's Paul's mom.
Same as me.
There's clearly a lot more to Paul's mom than you are led to believe in the beginning, and I love her. I am ready for anything with her.
Yeah, because there was a lot of stuff dropped at the end about her that it's like, wait, what?
Excuse me? What have you just done, Sanderson?
Yeah, I think that the reason why his mom became my favorite character was just because of the fact that here was a character that I really did not expect to see actually turned into a really crucial part of this entire story. And I may not watch that many Lost shows, but I always appreciate a character on a Lost show that like really lays the hammer down on in the courtroom. And the woman's got a pair of balls under that skirt. I'll tell you, she was just so powerful, considering the fact that her son is in a completely different world that she never would have imagined, where there's an actual war going on. She's literally fighting a battle that is just as intense in the halls of a courthouse, and I love that about her. And the fact that she literally like had no mercy. She says like, I gotta win this case. That's what I gotta do. And I just like the fact that we were seeing what another thing that I love about Sanderson is that he does something that for me makes a great writer. He turns the mundane into the extraordinary. Something that it could be as simple as a court case. This turned into something truly epic. Just as epic as what was going on with Paul in the other dimension. And I loved that.
Yeah, we kind of went for full circle with this whole concept of love the unlovable that I really, really liked. I was going to ask you guys if you noticed it, because I didn't notice it in my first read-through, but did you notice some of the Shakespeare?
Probably, I don't think so.
I am such a Shakespeare nut that those little itty-bitty nuggets, I'm like, Sanderson, what are you doing to me already? Come on now. There's a reason he's putting all of that in there, because Sanderson does not put details into things lightly.
Right, and I like how he kind of snuck Shakespeare in there, and the fact or the idea that this is all real in some shape or fashion. We just aren't aware of it, and I like it.
Mm-hmm. It just, It's why I like his stuff so much.
Yeah, I just love his world building. I love his characters. I always say that my favorite thing about him is that, and the funny thing is the fact that you just see it all in here, but action sequences, they're so vivid in the pages of his books, which is why I said at the beginning why he writes books like comics, because I always go back to that scene at the beginning of the third book of the original Mistborn where there's that epic beginning action sequence, and then Vin just like jumps down right and lands right on the ground, and I'm like, holy crap, she just did an Iron Man. That's what I always remember going back to, and I still remember reading that. I was like, how is it that no one, I'm just like wondering, how is it that no one else can write this kind of visual action so crisp? Like, you don't even need a television or anything visual. Like, you can see it all. You can see everything to the little cockroach running around in the dungeon wall. That's what's so amazing about his writing.
And I do think that is because he has been building worlds in his head for a long time. He's an avid Magic the Gathering player, an avid D&D player, an avid anime watcher. Like, he understands that world building, that animated, that surrealness. And that's why I think it's easy for him to put it in plain terms into a story. Because I do think other authors try to do this and they do exceed, but it's surrounded by all of these very purpled prose where it's very flowery writing. And so a lot of people just tune out and miss a lot of the beauty and majesty of the story because they're drowning in all these other unnecessary flowery details. Where Brandon just tells you where the bear craps in the woods. Like, that's just what he does. And it's exactly what you need.
I agree. There's a lot of people who can develop a world and develop a system, but not quite on the scale and as many worlds and as many systems as Brandon Sanderson seems to be able to do, because he's got this whole Cosmere, which I don't believe this is officially a part of, but it definitely has a feel of. Because it's got some influences, and maybe it's just because Sanderson wrote it that you could feel some of that. It'd be cool if we had some tie-ins, but at the same time, that's just me dreaming and hoping.
He's described it as non-Cosmere.
Okay.
Officially.
I mean, and it's also...
I just got that page up in the background with all the specific details, so...
It's also what I really appreciate is that it's really, really hard for an author to cross over into a completely different form of reading medium. I mean, I don't really know that many, or if any, comic book writers have ever actually decided that they were going to write a series of actual novels. I've never seen that before, but I appreciate that there are people out there that can actually, just like in Dark One, cross over into different worlds. You know, I really appreciate the fact that he's got the chops for it. But then again, like, whenever I read a book of his, I always imagine it being, like you said earlier, Jay, like an anime series or a comic book. It's just because of the way that he writes. And it's just like, you just crave more. Even when his stories come to an end, like, you just want more and more and more. Like, oh god, I could talk about the Wax and Wayne series for hours, because I just love that world, and I love those characters, and I love how he crosses over magic with science. You know, that's something that you don't see that often, and I really like it when you just write it and write it well. That's what Brandon Sanderson does. He writes a ton. How he has the time to write all this stuff is a miracle of creation. Like, seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if someone says watching Brandon Sanderson write a book or write a comic is like watching God create the world. I wouldn't be surprised if someone actually says that. But the fact that this guy has all these ideas and he's managing to find this happy balance to manage to get all of this done, even though it is taking time for certain things. But I just know that the more time it's going to take him to write something, I just basically say, it's going to be worth it when it finally arrives, and it's going to be awesome because he put all that time into it.
Definitely.
So I think those were all the major points that I had. Do you guys have any final thoughts?
Other than tell everybody to go buy it?
That was going to be my statement. Everyone go buy and read this book. You need to.
Because
I
seriously,
will.
the quality of the hardback issues are so good.
Yeah, I will definitely say that as someone who is so glad to be back into reading comics, and I know that there are a lot of you out there that are intimidated about starting to read comic books because you don't know where to start, or the classic superhero formula is just not for you. But again, that's the beauty of Brandon Sanderson, and that's the beauty of Vault Comics and all of these other indie publishers, because these are all writers and artists. Some of them have actually done DC and Marvel comics, but when they go into these little indie companies, the world is their oyster. They have the ability to give you something that you've never seen before. And even though these things can be so familiar to Brandon Sanderson fans, Dark One is such a unique comic book that if you let this one pass you by, I'm just going to say it's going to be a really sad thing, because this is just, you don't need to have anything read in advance. You don't need to even know anything about Brandon Sanderson's writing at all. This is just something that you can get into right away. You will be overly satisfied if you like a good dark fantasy book. And like all three of us in this room, you're going to want more. So what are you waiting for? Get this book and read it, because you're going to love it. It's a quick read, too. You'll be done with it before you know it.
Agreed. So go buy it, go read it, and of course, when book 2 comes out and any future books come out, we will be back here discussing it. So you're gonna want to like hit the subscribe button down below, because you're gonna want to hear it. And with that, I don't know how to end this. It's weird. I guess.
If you watch this on any Wednesday, we hope you had a wonderful new comic book day.
And all of our channels will be linked down below. If you like how we talk, come subscribe to all our channels.
For sure.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We wish you a happy reading, I guess.
There you go.
That's how I will end this.
And we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
There you go.